Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and respected author from Cape Town, South Africa, Jillian Reilly. Jill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Jill is the author of The 10 Permissions. She's the founder, a writer, keynote speaker, and a consultant. So, Jill, while we're going to focus our conversation around your book, a few questions for you before that. You've spent 30 years working across Africa, Asia, and Central Europe. What first inspired you to enter the field of social and organizational change?
Yeah, I am American by birth, from the Midwest of America, and was at university just as South Africa was experiencing its transition to democracy. And I was intending to go to law school. And instead, I got the idea in my head that I wanted a front row seat for what looked like one of the greatest transformations in history. So I decided, I believe like you did, to come to South Africa in 1993 and help be a part of the preparation for that election. I did election monitoring, I did voter education, and it was meant to be a short stint before I returned to my predictable path. And I just got very, taken with the potential for change here and interested in the process of human change. Yeah.
Fascinating, fascinating. And how did your experiences as an aid worker, captured in your memoir, shape the way you think about change and growth today?
Yeah, I will say, if I may, that it's mainly my failures in that field that have shaped my understanding and are really the basis for my book. I mean, I've been present with people as they've tried to navigate very profound change and realized how very hard it is. And as a change agent, as somebody attempting to facilitate and instigate change, I've realized my own limitations. And so my theme around permission, my theme around sort of activating your own agency, authorizing yourself to make novel choices and changes is really born out of that 30-year experience of realizing that, the green light for action sits within each one of us. And it's really our relationship with ourselves that's critical in terms of activating that capacity for change.
Great response. And what was the biggest turning point in your career that helped you to shift from international development into writing and consulting?
Trying to make sense of what had happened when I left a decade on the ground here doing what I thought was my dream job and realizing, as I've just referenced, that there were a lot of limitations. So I wrote my book after leaving Zimbabwe at the height of the AIDS epidemic. I left and I tried to make sense of it through my book. I really wanted to share those lessons with people around, the challenges of change and the realities of it. And then I wanted to shift into working with organizations to sort of work with smaller ecosystems and understand a little bit better, how, as I've described, to sort of activate agency and engage people, not in sort of being led through change and being passengers in change processes, but actually driving it themselves.
Amazing. Let's now talk about your book, The 10 Permissions. You describe your book as a way of updating how we do adulthood for the 21st century. Tell me about your book and what does this mean in practice? Give me an example if you can.
Yeah, I think the world over the past certainly 5 to 10 years has become so fluid, so disruptive, so chaotic. We all know that. We live that on a daily basis. And a lot of the old ways of operating that were very much framed around life in a linear, predictable world no longer serve us or reward us. So linear career paths, we all know, are sort of falling apart. Institutional advancement within corporates as a primary means of navigating career is no longer viable for the next generation. So a lot of these realities that we are contending with on a daily basis, I'm sort of saying, let's take a step back and in a more deliberate way, in a more intentional way. Let's update the way that we think, how our lives are supposed to look, how we're supposed to make decisions that bring security and success in a context where we have to be so much more adaptive and responsive to change.
And why do you call your book 10 Permissions rather than 10 Rules or 10 Principles?
For the reasons that I just referenced, I think this process of updating our operating system is going to require us to let go of a lot of our conditioning, a lot of what we've been told we're supposed to be, a lot of the ways that we believe we're supposed to act. And so that requires a lot of self-authorizing to say, listen, my life is not going to look like my parents did. My life is not going to look the way I expected it to. And I'm talking about whether you're 25 or 55. I'm working with people across the age spectrum who are sitting there going, wait a second, this is much different than I thought it would be. I need to allow myself, give myself permission to kind of own the fact that I've got to do this very differently. It means different mindsets, different strategies, and different ways of operating. And that requires a lot of self-permission.
Fascinating. You talk about be willful. How can people distinguish between being willful in a positive sense and being rigid or stubborn?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's obviously what we've been sort of conditioned to see our will as a sort of imposition on other people. You know, we're very uncomfortable with our own desires because we believe that by sharing them, they are, you know, an assertion of ourselves in an undesirable way. And part of what I'm saying there is that in this fluid world where we have so many choices to make, so many decisions to make, where we get to curate things, where we have to really decide for ourselves what right or wrong is, because you know, the paths are so many and only we know what's right for us. We've got to know what we want, because if we don't know what we want and we constantly are looking around for people to tell us what we want, we're going to be overwhelmed and anxious all the time, which I think is what we see a lot of. So it's not about sort of saying, I want this and stamping your foot. It's about saying, I know what I want. And now I'm going to bring that out into the world. And I might come up against resistance. I might come up against lots of different opinions. That's fine. That's how I shape and reshape it in a way that actually makes it viable for the world that I'm living in.
Well said. Your second permission is go astray. What does going astray look like in real life, especially for someone afraid of uncertainty?
Yeah, well, if you're afraid of uncertainty, now's the time to get to work on that, because we are living in uncertain times. And I think that that's precisely the point of Go Astray, which is rather than waiting to have to manage change, start to make change and embed change within your life. So it's an invitation to let go of the idea that the linear path is the best one, and that anything other than that is a sign that you're somehow, you know, failing, or that you're not progressing in the way that you should. I think the point of having a life that has more twists and turns and bends in it is that that's where the learning takes place. And that's where you learn to be more adaptive. So the point of the book really is that we need to drive our own growth and adaptation rather than waiting to respond to it. And by allowing ourselves to make change in a deliberate way, we sort of prepare ourselves for the changes that are coming at us that we need to manage all the time.
Well said. Permission number 3 is take it outside. Why is leaving our bubble so critical in today's fast-changing world?
Yeah, I was on a conversation this morning where an agile change person related that to this concept of like searchlight intelligence, where you need to be looking around all the time. So you can't be head down because you're going to get knocked over by things that you can't see. So we don't have the luxury of being in a bubble, and it's not desirable to be in a bubble. That is about constantly, you know, looking for signals, spotting patterns, being aware of what's on the horizon. Again, as part of a process of being responsive and adaptive and not rigid and sort of resistant to change, rather being receptive and able to cope with it. So yeah, I like that idea of the searchlight, of always looking around and being ready to kind of step outside of whatever you feel comfortable in.
Mm. Your fourth one is experiment. Many people fear failure. And most of us love status quo or maybe status quo ante. How do you help them to embrace experimentation without the fear of getting it wrong?
Yeah. I mean, I think the only way to start to gain more comfort with failure is through experimentation. And I
Mm.
would say choose things that are low consequence to start with. So, rather not start your process of experimenting with big things in your career.
Mm. Mm.
You can get comfortable trying new things,
Yeah.
trying things out in a way that doesn't feel high risk to you.
Mhm.
And in that process, start to learn how you react to novel things, how
Mhm.
you react to being a beginner, how you react to unfamiliarity. What you're trying to do in that process is, strengthen your discomfort tolerance,
Mm.
strengthen your capability for kind of moving towards the new rather than running away from it. So, lots of small, low consequence experiments are a great way
Mm.
to prepare yourself for some of the higher
Mm.
consequence ones.
Wow. Number five is feel your way. How do you balance intuition with rational decision making?
Well, I think we've been trained and conditioned to see rational decision making as our only tool for
Mm.
making important choices in our lives. And I think the invitation there is to balance it out with instinct and intuition when your rational self is, you know, overwhelmed with information,
Mm.
unable to make sense of the situation. I
Mhm.
think that's one of the biggest challenges of being alive right now,
Mhm.
is that we have cognitive overload
Yeah.
in many, many ways. And so our brains are overworked and our bodies are underutilized. So it's kind of saying, that's fine, you gather all the data you want, but also fact check it with your own gut, with
Mm.
your own sense, because in complex times, when the data might not be available or it might be, insufficient, you can and you should rely on a deeper sense of human intelligence to
Mm.
help you guide your own way forward.
Mm. And you then talk about forget about the future. Difficult thing to do, but in a world obsessed with long-term goals, why is focusing on the next best step more effective?
It's amazing. That's the one that really freaks people out the most. And I get it.
Mm.
It's very provocative. It's
Mm.
intentionally provocative because we are obsessed with the future. But in a complex world where most of us don't know what next year is going to look like, much less 5 years from now,
Mm.
that obsession can sometimes hold us back from being, as active and adaptive and learning as quickly as we can. So, the point is that in a complex situation, small steps are how you remain active and agile. You're
Mm.
learning, you're finding your way through something rather than going, oh, I think I know what's going to happen 5 years from now. I can sit back and
Yeah.
just execute on the plan. Um, so it's sort of leaning into not knowing what the long term is going to look like,
Mm.
accepting that and saying, maybe we should turn our attention away from trying to predict the future to trying to spot present tense patterns.
Mhm.
Maybe pulling our locus of control in tighter right now
Mm.
is a more effective navigation strategy than trying to have this long term vision, which is likely to shift as we move forward.
Mm. Well said. Your next one is think small. You know, when I was growing up, the famous IBM line was think big. But yet
Right?
one learned, take bite-sized milestones. So why do small
Right.
steps often feel harder than big leaps?
Because as you just said, we've been conditioned to believe that ambition takes the form of big, that if you want to make big things happen, you need to have big ideas and big plans. And I work with a lot of particularly younger people right now who are going, oh my gosh, I don't have that because I can't see that far ahead. And again, the point is that sometimes by taking small bites, as you describe it, by moving in a small way, you start to unlock things that you can't see from wherever you're standing.
Hmm.
So it's okay if the future is fuzzy for you to kind of move forward through it, actively learning as you go and creating as you go. That sometimes those small bites are how you unlock the biggest visions as you move along, rather than trying to have that vision before you set out.
Correct.
And then getting locked in place by something that might not turn out the way you want it to.
Correct. Number 8 is travel light. What are some practical ways people can let go of expectations or baggage? And we all have a lot of baggage that weighs us down.
Yeah, I think it's, one of the things I talk about in the book is take only what you can carry. So I think part of it is leaning into the idea that there will be different phases of your life and different situations that may require you to accept the fact that you can't always accumulate more, and keep carrying things. That the stigma with putting down, as you say, expectations, ideas, and leaning, even if it's only for a little while, into a space of, okay, I'm going to allow myself to be a little bit more responsive and be open to options in the present tense, and then seeing what that brings to me. I think it's a challenge to our programming around kind of more, and saying perhaps at times, particularly when things are very very much in flux, a less is more mindset is more useful for you to be as adaptive as you possibly can be.
Amazing. Number 9 is look for trouble. Most of us tend to duck facing difficult problems, but you say we must welcome friction and discomfort in our lives. Help me understand this.
As I say in the book, trouble has been my best teacher. By avoiding trouble, we're avoiding learning, and we're avoiding learning what we are capable of. If I look back on my early days as a very young person doing really hard things and being very uncomfortable, I gained what I, without, a lot of hesitation, would call the superpower of being able to be in rooms that were very uncomfortable, because the people in those rooms were arguing with each other, people who had long-standing grievances with each other. To be present to discomfort is to learn that it isn't as much of a threat to you as you might think it is. That we as humans have a lot more capability than we ever test ourselves to actually sit in it and to find our way through it. So I think that avoidance of it is what's gotten us to a place where a lot of people treat any small form of friction as a reason to run away. When actually, in the moment, what we need to do is be very present with ourselves and with each other through those moments so that we can kind of find our way forward together.
Wow. And the last one is make believe. How can imagination and play help adults unlock new possibilities?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much that's been said about being in a creator's economy, and I don't say that in the strictest of terms as it relates to digital media or things like that, but I do believe that with the advent of AI taking over a lot of the kind of execution roles, humans are going to be called upon and invited to step into more and more of the creative roles. And I think that's something that for a lot of people feels very transgressive. I always say, believe that you can make things. Now, a lot of us lost that belief at some point during our coming into adulthood. And I think now is the time for us to, as you say, tap a little bit more into, and here I would marry, play with experimentation, with the permission to experiment, the permission to think small. Like, it doesn't have to be some grand project in your life. It can be allowing yourself to make small things that you don't normally make. And I point to podcasts in this conversation of, if you told probably yourself a decade ago that you would be making podcasts, you might have said, really?
Absolutely, yeah.
But here's a great example of people making things. And in the process, you're bringing so much value to the world. You're creating connection, you're creating dialogue and greater understanding. So I think we are living at a time where, the potential for human creation is vast.
Yeah.
And we need to allow ourselves to explore that and what makes sense for each of us as individuals in that space.
Wow. So time for two more questions for you, Jill. Your 10 permissions, just to recap for our viewers and listeners, is be willful, go astray, take it outside, experiment, feel your way, think small, travel light, look for trouble, make believe. Which of the 10 permissions do you find people struggle with the most and why?
Well, I think truly the first one is the foundation of it all and the thing that is very challenging for people. I mean, I have people who come across my path who are talking about, their purpose in the world, and yet, they're kind of asleep to their days. They don't know what they want for lunch, much less what they want to do with their lives. And I think a lot of us learned very early on to kind of suppress our want and suppress our desire and look externally for guidance as to what that should be. And so to come back into yourself, and as you said, not as a means of, sort of dominance and trying to kind of stubbornly put your will out, but what I always say is by connecting with it and being able and willing to articulate it, you become a better co-creator, a better negotiator, a better conversationalist, because you are able to share what it is that you want, big or small, with the world, and then figure out whether or not that's viable. So, I could spend a lot of time just on that one as a real foundation for what it takes to move through a world where, the options are endless, the choices are vast. And if you're not able to come into your own sense of want, you can feel lost very, very quickly. And I think it's one of the shifts that we're being called upon to make at this time. And if we step into it, it opens up great potential for us.
Wow. And my last question for you, Jill. Can you share a story of someone who applied one of the permissions or more and experienced a significant transformation?
Yeah, I want to go to travel light because I do a little pop-up podcast where I talk to people about some of these permissions, and I've had a few people on there who've taken what feels to other people like the radical decision to downscale their lives. I mean, it's the most literal sort of translation of that permission, but to downscale later on in life and to create a more sort of agile and movable life for themselves as very successful professionals, not as nomads. And the stories that they tell of their family and themselves feeling a sense of richness and connection to the world that was unavailable to them when they were accumulating and building ever more stuff all around them, I think for me is a real inspiration, because I hear that from a lot of people. Oh, I'd love to lead a life that felt more lighter and more responsive. And I think it's possible. And I think, we can, in this moment in particular, give ourselves permission to imagine lives that might look very different, but are perfectly possible in a hugely digital world.
Amazing. But on that note, Jill, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been. I thought we'll focus on each of the 10 permissions, and you gave us some amazing insights into each one of the 10 permissions.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about your book, The 10 Permissions, and all the very best to you.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.